Hello. Thank you to everyone who is joining us today. My name is Katie Hamm. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Early Childhood Development here at the Administration for Children and Families. And I am thrilled to be joined today by Leah Austin, Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment at the University of California, Berkeley, and Chair of the Steering Committee for the new National Early Care and Education Workforce Center. Thank you for joining me, Leah.
Glad to be here.
So I'm here representing the Biden-Harris administration. From the beginning, this administration has been really clear about the importance and the value of the early care and education workforce. And we want to be sure that we are using every lever available to support this incredibly important workforce, supports the development of young children, supports families, and really forms the backbone of our economy. I know as a parent, I have relied on the early care and education workforce. And I also spent some time working in a child care center. I know that it is very emotionally intensive, labor-intensive work that is skilled. It requires a very deep skill set to support young children. At the same time, it is not valued that way economically. We see that early care and education providers are among the lowest paid people in this country, despite the fact that they work long hours. They worked through the pandemic. They do incredibly important work for children and for families. And we don't see the pay and benefits match that. And the results of that spill over into communities. We see higher turnover. We see parents unable to find childcare that they need when you can't recruit and retain a workforce in early care and education centers. So that's why we're here today. That's why we've invested in this new National Early Care and Education Workforce Center. We're excited to talk to you more about it today. We'll share more information about how to get involved and how to understand how you can benefit from some of the resources that the new center will provide. So Leah, let's jump in. I would love to hear from you. You've been at this work, ingrained in this work for a long time. What made you want to be part of this new effort and this new center?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons, but, first and foremost, and maybe this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways, it's about the workforce, right? It is intentionally about the people who are caring for and educating young children. And, we have about 2 million people in this country who are paid to provide early care and education, most of whom are women. Many are women of color. Amongst our home-based workforce, most are women of color and immigrant women. And as you described, the conditions that are provided to them to do this incredibly hard and important work are insufficient. And, from the outset, I think what was really unique about the ask or the request to create this workforce center is that the federal government and federal leadership really made it clear their understanding that we are not going to get to an effective and equitable early care and education system for children and families if we don't have effective and equitable conditions for the workforce, right? For people who are doing this work. So just on principle, that was very exciting and I think important, an important signal of how critical focusing on the workforce is. And then importantly, as you said, I've been at this for a while, and my center, the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment, this has been our mission. This has been the focus of our work since our founding. And the intent of this workforce center is to bring together a group of incredibly thoughtful partners to work across a host of issues that we know impact the early childhood workforce, that where we can change policy. And some of those most pressing issues we've identified, come down to, as we describe them, 5 key or essential areas of workforce policy. We've previously articulated this in the Early Childhood Workforce Index, which many people might be familiar with. And we're utilizing this to frame the activities of the Workforce Center. And just to say what those are so folks can hear them. It's qualifications and educational supports. We know how critical not just preparation and access, but the supports to ensure people can be successful and have the right conditions, work environment standards, compensation, financial relief, workforce data, and financial resources. And this center provides us the opportunity to dig deep into these issues with communities, with states and tribes and territories and Head Start programs and community programs and home-based programs, really the gamut, to take action to help communities make change, to share strategies, to learn from strategies. And again, the Workforce Center just has been an opportunity to bring together just really great thinking and leadership and research and technical assistance of the partners who are involved, the core partners, the collaborating partners, educators that we're already beginning to engage with. There's just so much to build upon here. So for all of those reasons, this is very exciting, and some of the reasons why I'm just so glad to be a part of this.
Thank you. You touched on a lot of the challenges and opportunities. And I think we know as an administration, we've been clear about the need for long-term and sustainable investment and really centering sustained wages as part of that. So making sure that we're paying wages that are either at parity with elementary school and provide that wage ladder for people as they gain more experience, as they gain more credentials. For a lot of people, some of the challenges that we experience, the low pay, high turnover, those feel like really thorny issues, really intractable issues. And so I think that as an early care and education field, we're holding this hope and looking for opportunity, as well as understanding that these are big challenges. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how the Workforce Center will address some of these issues and what sustainable impact you think we can have in this moment as we continue to seek resources, be clear about the need, but also try to make progress where we can.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question, because the problems can seem so big, right, and intractable and overwhelming. I think that in part makes it hard for people to make progress, because it feels like we're trying to get to this big thing. Like, how are we going to get there? It's impossible. And as you mentioned, it is the reality that like we need more money, right? There has to be more resources in the long run to get to ultimately where we want to be. But there are things we can be doing now, and there are more resources, and there's different ways that resources are coming to communities. So as I mentioned, we have kind of this no single strategy approach. We have these 5 areas that we're working on. But it's not only in content that we have this multi-pronged approach or no single approach. It's also in how we're going about the work. So we know that people need strategies and work now. People are doing this work, right? We don't have everything that we need, but people are engaged in running and operating quality improvement systems, their early childhood systems, or engaging in their communities. And there are things that we can be doing now. I think we really saw this and learned a lot from the pandemic relief funds that are informing our work and our approach. States did receive a lot of money, right? Didn't solve all the problems, but did receive an influx of funds. And what we know is in our engagement with states, there were many things people wanted to do, and some were able to do that, but some also ran into challenges with not having those strategies, right? What's the infrastructure? What are the steps to take to get from where we are to where people have the opportunity to go to? And so that really was about like, how do we take what we have and implement some real practical things on the ground? So, we like to sometimes describe this as, it's where the rubber hits the road at the state level, the local level, with territories and tribes. Like, folks are making decisions. They're making decisions about federal funding that's flowing to them, about their local and their state dollars. So we're structuring our work at the Workforce Center, our TA, to work across those levels to ensure we're thinking about all types of programs, to share learnings, to share strategies, to work in community and be learning with people together, to implement some of those things, to identify where are they in their state. People are at different stages. And so you may be really far ahead on workforce data strategies, for example. You know a lot about your workforce, but maybe you need more strategies to figure out like, oh, there's a population that we're really missing when it comes to access to stipend programs or wage supplement programs or higher ed opportunities. So working on those real practical things for folks are ways that we're thinking about RTA and collaborating with partners across all levels. And the other thing I guess I would say is also really ensuring that we're taking a systems approach so that we can be working toward and having all of this done in the service of sustainable systems, right? This is not about a single program in a community that can or can't do something. There's the systems that are either able to facilitate their ability to do all of the things that we know people want to be doing in their work with children and families, or there's ways in which systems can be undermining that. So really having that long game, but doing things that we know are really are doable, they're practical, and people are saying they want and need those strategies and actionable items.
I really like the way you frame that about people are doing this work now. They are implementing funds and programs and practices now, and we have an opportunity to improve the way that we do that. I often remind people that as a federal government within the Administration for Children and Families, we're providing over $22 billion a year in federal funding to support access and services to children and families in early care and education programs. We have an obligation to make sure that those funds, that we're partnering with our grantees to make sure that those funds are used to support and bolster the workforce rather than contributing to some of the challenges that we have seen in this field for far too long. I also want to pick up on something else you said about equity and making sure we're doing this in an equitable way. We know, and a lot of your research has showed that you see differences in pay and benefits and working conditions when you look at the race of the provider, when you look at the age group that they work with. People who work with infants and toddlers make less money, home-based versus center-based providers. Can you talk about the equity lens here and how you're thinking about that in the workforce center?
Yeah, I think it really undergirds this work as a whole, right? And, one of the core values that we came to this, that when we look across the partners who are implementing the Workforce Center, a core value is centering the workforce, working with educators, not just on behalf or doing something for educators, but really being engaged with, the wide spectrum. And in particular, as you identified, we know from existing research that there are disparities in which women of color, in particular Black women in the sector, and those who are working with infants and toddlers are, systematically undermined in their well-being and in their working conditions and in terms of access. So ensuring that in our work that we are engaged with educators, that we are continually kind of checking ourselves and how we're going about our own work, not just trying to hold other people accountable. And, while many staff who are working as part of the Workforce Center have been early educators, as you said, you worked in a preschool before, right? But conditions and realities and the context change over time. So it's really critical that our work now is informed by, it's reviewed by, it has contributions from, and is really responsible and responsive to educators today, to educators themselves. So to this end, we've already invited educators to participate in research. We're establishing an educator leadership board. We have a community of practice planned around engaging with educators in your community so that we can be supporting systems leaders to be active in their early educator communities and develop strategies to ensure that educators are part of the work that they're implementing and that they're designing. And again, that interest in making sure we're reaching folks who really have been furthest from opportunity in many different ways. And I guess keeping this mantra of like, we can't do something, for people without people. And the other thing I would name, I think there's lots of things we could probably go into, but the other thing I would name right now is around research and data. And I think this is, twofold. I mentioned that one of our policy areas is workforce data systems. And so it's not only about supporting people to have a data system where they're collecting information. That's important, right? We need the infrastructure and the ability to do that. But working with folks on strategies to think about what questions are you asking of the data, right? What are you trying to answer? Is there something you're missing? Who are you collecting data from? Are the people you're not collecting data from? That's just as important when we think about equity. Who don't you know about in your community? What does that tell you about who you might be reaching? How do we help people have strategies to ask those questions and identify where they might have disparities in their communities? And that's going to vary across communities. Because really this absence of data allows the status quo to persist. It allows disparities to go hidden if we don't have the data in front of people. So that's a really important part of being able to address inequities, is being able to identify them. And then the second piece of research and data I think is really important is the way that we're going about our work in the center, which is in this research to practice loop. Maybe a better way actually to describe it is like a research to practice to policy loop, that we're undertaking research that is driven by policy and practice questions. And that is then intended to go back and specifically inform change strategies and the, technical assistance and work being done with communities. And again, with this very, with a particular priority around identifying and being able to address, barriers or disparities we see now, but also those that we know are historic and have really been built into some of our systems.
That brings me to the last question, which is, you've studied the history of this issue and looked at the trends over time. What makes you hopeful about the center in this particular moment in time?
Well, there are certainly enduring challenges and equities for sure that we have to address. And, I was just reflecting back, and I think I said this to you recently, but we'll share with folks here. I clearly recall the first time we actually met in person. I'm sure we had been on email or conference calls or something. But I was with Marcy Whitebook, who was then the director in the Center for the Study of Child Care Employment, and we were in a coffee shop, you remember where, but somewhere in a coffee shop in or near a train station in DC. And Marcy had just released Worthy Work Still Unlivable Wages, which had documented, really just showed that wages had not changed, and in some cases had lost ground over the last 25 years from the National Child Care Staffing Study. So for that reason, I know it was 2014, so it's almost a decade ago. But that had just come out. We were eagerly awaiting the Transforming the Workforce report, which was coming. And we were certainly, I'm sure, talking about policy and strategy, but we were also just sharing our frustration about, it was hard to get traction, to get people to talk about the workforce and their well-being, and recognize for most of the history of this work, we really couldn't talk about compensation in the workforce without a lot of explaining and rationalizing of why are we talking about the adults in the room and their well-being? And today, it's been less than a decade, right? There's been hundreds of years of just all of the challenges of addressing the workforce. And, we still have those challenges, but we can talk about the workforce and get traction in such a different way today than even 9 or 10 years ago, when we were still struggling around this. for better or for worse, the pandemic has given a new light to shine on this issue. We have an administration that has understood the role of the workforce from day one and has put resources behind that. Like, this workforce center is an example of that. Money and resources and leadership behind change. We're learning from communities in new ways. We see people working across those 5 policy areas. So all of that to say, I think what gives me hope is not just an idea or a sentiment, but like there's proof, right? We have proof that we are really making progress. We have proof points in communities that are making change and have really made strong advancements for the workforce, particularly around compensation and well-being. So I think what gives me hope is that we're having a very different conversation than we were 9 years ago.
Yes.
But that there's action that is going along with this, and not just our ideas and hopes for what is.
Well, that's a great note to end our conversation on. I do think there's enormous opportunity, even in the face of enormous challenges. Speaking on behalf of the administration, this is a both and strategy for us. We want to, as Leah said, as we're working with grantees, as we're working with communities, with states, territories, tribes, we want to make sure that we are seizing every opportunity to make improvements for the workforce, improve compensation, benefits, working conditions. We also have made it very clear that we need a long-term $600 billion investment to really get this done, to make quality, affordable childcare with well-compensated providers a reality in this country. But while we're waiting for Congress to act on that, President Biden earlier this year signed a comprehensive set of executive actions, the kind of largest undertaking we've had from a president to make care more affordable, to support caregivers, to make it more accessible for families. And the executive order is really a whole of government approach. And we really see this as one of the contributions that we can make at HHS to support our grantees who are working with early educators across the country. Last month, HHS proposed new rules for the Child Care and Development Block Grant, which would improve the financial stability of childcare providers, encourage more to participate in the subsidy system, and thus create more options for families who use those subsidies. So again, we are searching high and low for every opportunity. We know this is an area of huge importance to educators themselves, to children and families. Leah, I want to turn to you for the last word. We want to know, how can we get involved? Where should our audience go if they want to learn more about the center and get involved?
Yes, well, just as there's no single strategy for the work, there's no single way to be involved with us. So there's multiple opportunities. The first step is to go to the Workforce Center's website. I think that can be dropped in here, but it's nationaleceworkforcecenter.org, and follow us on social media. You'll find information there about what we're doing, about technical assistance activities that are currently available. If you sign up for our lists, you'll make sure you get those opportunities. So there's webinars, there's community of practices, there will be other technical assistance opportunities coming as well. We'll be having our research on the site and other resources that are available in the sector that we're helping to pull together to make available to folks. So sign up, visit the website, stay tuned, follow us on social media. And finally, we really encourage early educators in centers, in homes, in schools to sign up as well, to participate, to consider serving on the Educator Leadership Board. Keep an eye out for those applications. That's going to be a really critical part of our work.
Thank you. We look forward to all the great work that will come out of the Workforce Center and their work with local and state partners. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.